Hello, hello, hello. It's your boy Wild Philosophy here with your regularly scheduled reminder that fairies are real. Today I have my friend Matt Crotts with me, and
Yo.
we have oh, sorry.
Sorry, didn't mean to step on you. No, keep going, keep going.
Today we have a pretty interesting topic for you. Both of us are approaching the exact same topic using two totally different lexicons from two totally different fields.
Mm,
Uh,
mm, that's
he
exciting.
is coming from, so he's going to discuss, and we sort of discovered that we had the same shared, maybe not interest. I don't want to say perspective because I don't think that's what it is. Shared area of interest across academic disciplines,
Mm,
if you can call it that, or spheres of reality. Um, and
yep.
this has to do with the ways in which society has been trendified or spectacleized, if you'll pardon some aggressively awful neologisms, uh, and our engagement with the world has turned into a mode, a la mode, rather than a sort of, well, I want to say sincere because we're actually going to critically discuss sincerity throughout the course of this lecture. But
Yeah.
he's going to approach this from uh, the realms of sort of what you call modern day online cultural criticism. Um, would that be a
Yeah, that's
fair
fair. Mm-hmm.
description of these spheres? And I am coming from this as a classically trained philosopher with a deep interest in Confucianism and the epistemics of modernity. So he'll be discussing, and we kind of looked up, like we both got started at different angles, and then when we shared our, I don't want to say theses, but those areas, we weren't really able to do much research because of the paucity of online resources. So this will be as much a discovery for us as it will for you.
Mm.
I'm going to discuss the spectacle and the notion of the shallows in critical theory near the end. But before that, he is going to introduce the prolificity, sincerity, authenticity triad.
Yeah, so basically this is something that's kind of come up in uh cultural critical YouTube and Discord circles. What in particular known as TLC, this little corner of the internet, which I'm trying to help. I'm trying to give Canadian healthcare to that term. But it's, I mean, these are guys that are interested in, folks that are tangential to Vervaeke and Peugeot, two Canadians that I admire greatly, who are trying to sort of get at what culture has been and what is it going towards, I suppose, trying to track in some sort of uh, essentialist way. Like, is there a simple way we could kind of talk about what how we can track this sort of particular change? And simply put, in an honor shame culture, you've heard of that sort of paradigm. That I think
So
that patterns well with a sincerity culture. Yep.
maybe before we get into that, maybe we want to talk about what change it is we're noticing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Sorry, that's as much my error as it is. I'm sitting there like, wait a second.
I think people are flustered with trying, and clearly I'm flustered with communicating this, that something seems to have broken down in terms of our ability to communicate genuine, uh, to demonstrate our own genuine commitments to things in light of it towards other people, and for that to be read effectively. I think that's a broad way to get at that, in a way that this triad is meant to clarify. There's like 3 dimensions in which different cultures and our own Western kind of Anglo descendant culture has done all 3. It's not something that necessarily one culture only does one of them. But this third one being something of a neologism itself is my understanding, because most cultures have either been a sincerity culture or an authenticity culture. And now there's this third one that people have postulated that has arisen thanks to social media in particular, that's allowed for us to talk about prolificity, the profile of a person being the way in which you demonstrate your genuine commitments in society. So that's a new thing that authenticity culture and sincerity culture didn't have to do, because there wasn't a technological motivation to explore this third dimension.
Yeah.
How did I do?
Yeah, pretty good. I'm trying to think of. There's been a lot of really amazing examples that I think. So we can talk about politics, but we can also look at stuff like a lot of cottagecore, and an astonishing amount of TikTok trends are aesthetics with no like relation to any sort of lived commitment. It's a proverbial joke in a lot of circles that people who are really into cottagecore are the one group of people on the planet least likely to actually enjoy any sort of cottage or rural life.
Sounds about right.
And so in some senses, not corporate in the sense that it's money driven, which can be said about anything in modern society and isn't an especially impressive critique, but corporate in the sense that it tends to be the exact same set of patterns recurring again and again. And then you also are seeing people, the increase, and the title, the Trendification, I got it from the increasing number of I guess cultural criticism videos I've seen critiquing people mostly in Gen Z, my generation, turning entirely normal ways of behaving into like a trend. Like,
sounds about right.
So a lot of the softcore stuff is a trendy way of phrasing, like just being polite. Sometimes it means other things, but often people are like, I'm in my soft mode. I'm like, what do you mean? And then what they mean is they're just being normal and polite and respectful. One of the biggest TikTok trends, I can't say it because we haven't been like the name they're calling it, because it's a term for that's also used in the discussion of the bedroom stuff. And we've only been on for 8 minutes, but it's sitting on a plane normally.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's like people will post videos. It's called, what was it, raw ... dogging. I don't know why it's called that. I hate that name. It's just sitting on a plane. It's just sitting, and what, 50 years now, people have been taking steady commercial flights, maybe a little longer. I'm not an aviation history nut. But in all that time, nobody felt obliged to give any trend name or social name for sitting on the plane. You're just there. You're on a plane. And now it's things become a trend.
Yeah, it's like you do have to meme it now before it's real.
Yeah.
You know, which I think is characteristic of what people are calling prolificity culture. Before you could do it sincerely, right? You could dress the part. You could tick all the boxes. You could do it the way people expected you to do it. I think that's, simply put, that's what sincerity culture is. You could do it authentically. You could do it with firm personal commitments, no matter what anyone told you, that you were going to do it the way you wanted to do airplane travel, right? That could look different from other people's, and very often did. If you wanted to listen to music on your phone in authenticity culture, you wanted to put that on speaker for the whole flight, gosh darn it, you'd do that, even if that would get you ejected from sincerity culture. But now in prolificity culture, you have to talk about raw dogging, apparently. So
I hate that name. No, yeah. And we could point out like dozens of other more minor like trends, like the trend of like making. I've seen a whole bunch of trends involving like making breakfast for your husband or something. Like that's not a trend.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's making husband breakfast.
Yeah.
Do people do that all the time? But they've done it for millennia. And so that sort of, as prolificity is doing it for this extreme, like center. I want to give it a morally censorious term.
Like you do. That's funny.
No, I don't want to. Yeah. I'm like I want to say like extreme vanity. As to what others are thinking, but this, I guess, notion that yourself is rooted in how others perceive you, is that maybe a neutral?
But how does that distinguish from an honor shame culture? Which well. How would that could be different from traditional Chinese culture, for instance?
Well, so
right?
Confucianism is interesting. And you kind of sort of switched from the start of the topic to the deep end with that one, because
we can leave that for the finale.
Yeah. Well, we haven't even defined what's the difference between sincerity and authenticity, and I think it's hard to explain the, say, Chinese perspective.
Is it? Yeah.
Without first explaining that difference.
Well, so my understanding is, so I've grown up in the South, and now I live in the South of the United States, and now I live south of the South of the United States in a very different culture. And in the South of the United States, traditionally it was very much a sincerity culture. You had a role ascribed to you by culture, and your success within the culture was determined by how well you performed that role. It's not a role that you found for yourself. It's not something that you divined by communing with your sacred self-identity or something like this. It's something that that you discover has been defined for you, and so you have to live up to the expectations of said role that pre-exists you and will live after you're gone. And there's a lot of interesting upsides to that. There's a mode and a measure for every social situation, so you'll never be caught off guard. No one ever is stuck in an awkward situation. There's no such thing as awkward situations in a sincerity culture, because there's always a graceful means of saving face in a sincerity culture. You could always politely bow out, even if everybody in the room knows that they hate each other. You can handle that perfectly respectfully, and from an authenticity culture, you can do that responsibly, is how they'd see it, to navigate that. And so authenticity culture, which is popular, so people will like to say in these circles that we're navigating, that for some reason, I don't know, like everything in the world before the boomers, I suppose, was sincerity culture. West, east, north, south, like the globe was sincerity culture. I feel like that's severely limiting our understanding of history and all the cultures before the 1950s.
I think a lot of the time people take these frameworks and apply them hermeneutically when they should be applying them heuristically,
Mm.
which mean like these are tools that we can sort of use to begin analyzing phenomena. But I think we should be very wary of letting them come to speak for the phenomena.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Oh, absolutely. I love being hesitant in the
Because
face of those sort of things. Even as I ascribe it to Southern United States culture. But
sincerity is very important in Confucianism.
mm,
Your role is very important, but Confucianism's attitude to that is very distinctive compared to, say, Presbyterianism, or I'm trying to think of another role ethics. It is. It is flopping out of my head. I guess technically Judaism, but I think Judaism and Confucianism are in not perfect, but reasonable agreement on this point. At least less disagreement.
We do have a question to the chat. I don't know if you'd like to address it, Griswold Graham.
We'll get a couple. Hey, Grizz. The I Ching is Confucianism. Yeah. It predates Confucius. He purported, it's part of the scriptures of part of the Confucian canon, which academics don't like. They're like, oh, it's a Song dynasty, but Confucians recognize it as the canon, so we're going with it. It purportedly has a commentary by Confucius. Again, academics, don't want to say Confucius wrote it. I don't think it matters. What's important is the guy we ascribe as being Confucius is accredited the work. The I Ching was hugely important to Confucius's followers. And in nowadays, it tends to get associated more often with Taoism because of the weird view in the West that Confucianism is political and Taoism is spiritual, which isn't accurate. Taoism was way more political than the hippies wanted you to think, and Confucianism is way more spiritual. Most of the major commentaries on the I Ching and all the ones that inform Taoist alchemy were written by Confucians.
What is it fair to say? I mean, I know it's a very simple philosophical bucket, but can we put all of China into this sincerity bucket, this category?
We can,
with
the proviso that I would say that the major philosophical strains of China have all believed in some sort of original nature. And they have tried to use, Chinese traditions have tried in a variety of ways to bring propriety, ritual propriety, and the self, like in an authentic sense, into dialogue with each other. So
the authentic self in this sense of your unique individualist nature, your
original nature, your
okay, so they've got both. That's cool.
Yes, and that's my point about sort of heuristic is in Confucianism is role ethics, right? Your role as father, your role as wife, your role as son. It does not define people. Like, people exist in a web of social relations. Those relations are inescapable. You can't. This is why I think there have been attempts by some scholars to make Confucianism compatible with progressivism, and they've all failed because your social role is inextricable in Confucianism, and progressive philosophy tends to be very authenticity focused. Does not have much of a space for roles which it sees, social roles which it sees as constructs.
See, I love this because people have tried to connect Calvinism, popularly defined, with sincerity culture, which I also think breaks down, but similar to how it breaks down with roping that with Taoism, it sounds like. So
yeah, well, I mean,
more complicated.
people forget, like, Taoism. It's really funny to me that it ended up being associated with hippy dippy anarchism in the West, when the first legal treatise from Taoism is the Han Feiji, founder of legalism, the most authoritarian philosophy to ever come out of China. And the first,
total state philosophy.
Yeah, the first religious Taoist movement tried to install a theocracy, a literal, like, not a theocracy in like they wanted religious law. No, like they wanted an actual ruled by priest king. Theocracy in the most literal sense of the term. So it's one of the weirder things, that like reception of Taoism and Confucianism in the West. It's like, it would also be a mistake though to say that Confucianism limits people to their social roles or implies that they lack agency, because fundamental to the notion of the original self in Chinese philosophy is the notion that your immediate sentiments are not your original self. They're part of there's a Qing. I'm probably mispronouncing that. It's often translated emotions. It just sort of means like attributes. Is another I've rendering, and it's a weird term. It doesn't render well into English, but though that's not your original self, and to get back to your original self, you need to sort of undergo transformation.
So that would be, if I could just highlight a distinction here, like that's my understanding that would differentiate that traditional Chinese worldview from authenticity culture, where your instinctive, emotional intuition is fundamentally a part of your original self from an authentic perspective. Yeah. It sounds like there's I mean, no surprise, there's a parting away between authenticity culture, as exemplified by Gen X and younger, Gen X and millennials, and traditional Chinese culture. Who would have thought they'd have different worldviews?
Yeah, what a mystery. And Chinese, not to say that they hated the emotions or didn't think they were important, but they have a variety of different rules. So Zhi, Confucius's grant, Zisi, sorry, Zisi, Zhi, wrote, he's best known for having written the Zhongyong, or Doctrine of the Mean. In the 70s, they unearthed a cache of other documents he wrote, talking about emotional regulation in the context of the theory of 5 elements, which perfectly fits. The Doctrine of the Mean is the main work on sincerity in Confucianism. Or Qing. That's one tradition. The Zhuangzhu movement also had its notion of yaliang, a very distinctive type of emotional state. So variety of responses to this, most of which I think can fit in the sincerity heuristic framework. But I wouldn't, as I said, I wouldn't want to be too heavy-handed about applying it.
I feel bad, Wild Philosopher, because I think I might have steered you into describing Chinese philosophical history when you did not want to spend tonight primarily talking about Chinese philosophical history. So, mea culpa. How would you like to tackle? You know, are there more like topical concerns that you'd like to attack, maybe with contemporary culture and its reactions? How it's used, how it's trying to describe this sort of stuff, describing its past, present, and its anticipated future, and where it's falling short in its descriptions.
Yeah, so we actually can bring ancient Chinese civilization into modern day topical issues, right?
I was hoping that was the case.
Yeah, sorry about that. We are getting to the end of the ordinary. So in the 60s, 70s, you have multiple different. Yeah, I'm sorry, Griswold. We're still getting. I mean,
Grizz understands how to. Yeah, he's keeping us on track.
Yeah. We are going to. I mean, the end of the ordinary is the sort of when you see all these trends issue, it's always worshiping. Implicit behind a lot of the trends is standing out, right? Being unique, and this is the sort, I guess, authenticity, or like being unique, be you, be yourself. Like how many corporate slogans have we seen on that topic? And the notion that these embodied activities are unique in the sense of a departure from some sort of mass or some sort of norm. I sometimes see in cultural, see in a lot of Christian spheres the weirder tendencies that you see, like on the people who get up in pink hair, and put a nose ring or whatever, and they have 5 genders. That tends to be labeled like a retreat from God or whatever, or abomination against God. And it sometimes gets loped into like Marxism, right? Consistently, it has nothing to do with. I mean, it's distantly related to a branch of Marxism that didn't receive a big impact in Marxist circles, but it's very American. Actually, it's more bluntly, it's the progressive manifestation of the right. And worshiping the rebellion.
I'd agree with that. We're founded. We're a revolutionary nation, founded on a revolution. Absolutely.
Yeah. Very, very rebellion-oriented country. In contradistinction to, say, a country. No, and I said ordinary. We tend to sort of think of ordinariness or normalcy as this like conventional figure who lives in his like white picket house and has no thoughts of his own. But the ordinary or the normal also connotes a center. It connotes a communal sort of self that exists with other people. And so to sort of connect the topic and then maybe launch into a little bit more history with some guiding threads for, I guess, Griswold. The trendification of reality threatens the ordinary because it just destroys any center by reduces our actions to trends, right?
The center becomes the tip of the spear of cultural trends, maybe, or something.
It becomes
paper airplane, or to mix a metaphor.
It becomes transitive modes, like in the fashion sense. Like fadism. We're all going to do this because it's the fad, and that destroys any actual it destroys a common ground, a shared a shared game, as Wittgenstein would call it.
Well, okay. Maybe maybe I'm going to push back slightly just to see if you can reinforce your point even better by shutting this theoretical pushback down. Isn't there still seems to be a game, right? The center is just a moving target that authenticity and sincerity cultures don't have to deal with. Not at this sort of vector. Like prolificity is about being in on that moving target versus lagging behind that target. And if you could demonstrate you're in that center, if you're at the tip of the the edgy humor, for instance, or the tip of the, if you know all the memes, if you're the first person to use the memes, you're in the center, right? Or is that not the case?
Yeah. Sorry, or I probably should have maybe picked my words a little better. Yeah, you're in the in thing. In maybe center was not the right words.
No, actually, I do like what you. Okay, all right. Now we're gonna defend you because I feel like the thing to do is to be on the edge in a prolificity culture. And being in the center is a demonstration that you're not catching up, right? Maybe that's but center and edge is still, periphery is still like a useful paradigm, but the point is to be on the periphery, right? Maybe.
Yeah, the be hip, don't follow the crowd, don't have it like we talk. Ordinary means it's from a Latin word that means like the custom or the order, regular. Common is another Latin word. It means together. These are words that entered English to connote or mean, like, I want to say unity, because those who have watched this channel before know I have reservations about the unity diversity dichotomy. But the notion of a commons, and that we're participants in that commons.
Yeah.
Whereas the prolificity is a willful absenteeism from the commons.
Yeah, the value is to be out of the commons. So that means, yeah, everyone, which is a little worse than authenticity culture, because at least authenticity culture is saying, like Griswold Grimm said, be yourself, follow this trend. At least authenticity culture is selling you a center still. And prolificity culture is merely riding the wave of the algorithm, which no market has control over, despite their best intentions and efforts. Despite their worst intentions, they have no control over the algorithm. So it really is center destroying in a much more profound sense, right? It's Chris says, wouldn't the trends be the edges of the Overton window of behaviors and the ordinary, the behaviors therein? I think that's kind of what we're saying, right? I think, yeah.
I don't like the Overton window.
Okay.
Just as an idea.
Yeah.
A lot of the ideas that are like, so let's say if you pay no attention to modern politics and you go back 100 years and you read 20 books on Marxist theory and like 20 books on howdy upcycle, like fascist theory, 20 books on liberal theory or whatever, and then you hop back nowadays, you will notice that there's just a crap ton of like Marxist views that are considered either normal or mandatory in wide parts of the right, and most Marxist beliefs are actually just banned in Marxist circles.
There you go.
You'll just be kicked, and it's I don't think it's that the Overton window shifted. It's I think our ideas of left and right are they refer to putative historical movements that don't exist, except maybe in the moment, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
a lot. Earlier I saw you tweeting about the prolificity stuff, and you were talking about aesthetics. Did
Yeah.
you know that the movement? Have we ever spoken in private about how the movement to relaunch aesthetics as a way for the common man was Marxist for almost all of its history, and then it got adopted by the right and just abandoned by the left?
I love that. No, we
Yeah.
haven't talked about that. That's fantastic. I mean, I know. I mean, everyone knows early Soviet era posters are genuinely some of the most inspired posters of the mid 20th century.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the neo-Gothic movement and the craftsman movement, or the arts and crafts movement, or in England, and the craftsman movement in America, which produced a lot of the really distinctive, like American Wild West art style, or the stereotypical like English Gothic. Those were anarcho-communists or Christian socialists. They worked together, and they said it was not fair for beauty to be restricted to the elite. The common man too should be entitled to beauty. And they launched movements to bring beauty to the common man, through like both ways of internally modifying your house, ways of building more beautiful houses and furniture, urban planning. You had the Garden Cities movement. It exported. This all got exported to Japan, where it became Mingai or Mingai. I'm probably Mingei. It was a big movement between like the 1870s and I want to say the 1920s, 1930s, like Gustav Stickley in the US. And most of the people, not all, but because people were a lot more reasonable about working across party lines back then. But a lot of the people involved were Marxists, and this really got started in Marxist, communist, socialist circles.
Are you telling me that Marxism invented populism? Because that's how people on the right talk about these same topics, but using a different term today. If you just say populism, just like how we might hear a Marxist critique capitalism, someone on the right will just critique consumerism, and they're functionally you could just switch those words out and read the same critiques, and they would still work.
Maybe I wouldn't want to say the Marxists invented. You are right about like capitalist, consumerist. It really means the same. It doesn't mean literally the same thing, but it's often used interchangeably.
Yeah, it's a safe. I don't hear because of the tribalism. I don't know if it's prolificity or not, but because of the political tribalism in political conversations today, it's really not safe. I guess. Actually, this is probably a sincerity problem. To use certain words, so you just use a word that has the exact same function. Just your tribe gets to own it. I suppose that's my critical impression of what's going on.
I mean, that's okay. Maybe that's one way of looking at it. I think people's abilities to look beyond language has really collapsed in the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah, there's that.
And that is at least partially intentional, not on the part of most people, but like a lot of academics are absolutely convinced that words and reality are one and the same thing. And you can just sort of rewrite reality with language, which isn't totally false, to give credit where credit is due, but they take it to absurd conclusions.
Yeah, yeah. And if you are doggedly committed to that belief, if you authentically and sincerely hold that belief, you're going to work with that hermeneutic in mind, and you're going to use language to influence power dynamics, right? Even if it doesn't, you don't have to live in a world where that exists. You can certainly operate as if it exists, and it's going to affect yourself and those around you, particularly if you are in positions of power, and that's your goal, to put yourself into positions of power. But
well, and I can't count the number of conversations I've had where I've gotten people to nod along to ideas that they ostensibly hated, by swapping a couple terms around.
there you go.
We're not talking about self-improvement, because that's associated with Jordan Peterson and he's far right. We're talking about Chinese self-cultivation.
There you go.
It's such a big difference.
We're not talking about environmentalism. We're talking about conservation.
Nice to meet you, Grizz.
And it doesn't, and you can't spell conservation without conservative. So, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thank you. To be fair to that last example, that was there was an ostensive shift in ideas behind that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Namely, two different land ethics.
No, those are actually different.
Yeah.
Very fair. Yeah.
But you do see that a lot with
but you can get one group to talk about something that popularly, there's a big tent called environmentalism or something.
Yeah.
You can get people to talk about things that they'd otherwise be uncomfortable talking about by using a different word.
I can't count the number of conversations I've had with really hardline fundamentalist Christians and Muslims about like sex magic. Just swap some words out, and all of a sudden it's like people can't notice.
Grizz, you left 30 seconds too early.
Yeah, it's just a language. It's and I think part of the problem with talking about any political issue or religious issue nowadays is there's always 4 different factors that are mutually reinforcing. Prolificity is one of those. The collapse of our ability to use language is another.
Yeah. Can I give you a richer target to aim at with what I was posting today about aesthetics?
Yeah.
And the populist movement of Methodism in the as exemplified by John Wesley and his brother in England and in the Americas. I just found it interesting that there's like a trad Methodist account, a non-account, that likes to post about returning. And I grew up Unitarian and Methodist at various points.
My condolences.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Sorry.
I don't know if this is. I suppose this is me doing the sincerity turn, because I'm saying that I get to speak to it because I've had that role, I guess, at some point or something. But I just find it curious that a trad Methodist account will critique. We'll say we need to return to doing, early 19th century style prayer hall, like early colonial Methodist type churches, which are admitted, more than I will proudly say they're gorgeous, historic works of architecture, of worship spaces. But to say that as a Methodist just makes my head spin right off, because the whole point of Methodism was kind of that authenticity turn, I think, which is why it was successful in England, but 10 times more in the Americas. where people were living their authentic selves, and itinerant preachers were much more successful here because that was I think it's valid to say that that was an expression of an authentic way of expressing one's sacred validly held beliefs to just ride from town to town preaching outdoors with no particular interest in aesthetics, because aesthetics was what the Catholics did, right? Aesthetics were what the secret secret societies did, but we did it out in the open with muddy boots, just jumping off horses and preaching with nothing but the Bible,
which is an aesthetic.
Yeah, no, yeah, sure. Well, very fair, but at least that would be prime Methodist aesthetic, I feel like. And talking about things the same way a Roman Catholic trad account says today is just, that's bizarre to me, because that it just goes to show that these things are changing. I'm not saying it's invalid to be a Methodist and to do that. I'm much more interested in just acknowledging that clearly people who are considering themselves trad and Methodist are doing something that John Wesley would not have recognized as something that he was interested in doing.
Yeah, Wesley was a fascinating figure who I probably don't want to get into because we could be here for hours talking about him.
Sure, yeah.
Probably one of the strangest figures in recent Christian history.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
But it is, I guess it is one of the more interesting examples of, you talk about the prolificity theory, and one of the critiques that Moeller, who first articulated it, was, I think, correct about, is there is a type of authenticity that where it's like, if you're not outdoors in barn boots, it's not genuinely authentic, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, which is why you can sell a trend to an authenticity culture, like Grizz pointed out. You can sell that to an American authenticity culture, that idea of that bootstraps, stripped down, low church vibe, which is an aesthetic. We live in a world, we live in a society, no matter what you try to do to avoid that, you just end up adopting a different aesthetic, a reactionary aesthetic.
All human thinking is in some sense aesthetic. This is why, like, in one sense, I agree with you and with Wesley that you can and should be able to be in connection with God everywhere. In another sense, like all human thinking, even thinking that is putatively rational, like the signs and ways of thinking are all aesthetic.
Yeah.
And this is true now. This was even more true in the past, when they were thinking tended to be much more symbolic. Not because of evolutionary reasons, just because people preferred symbolic reasoning then. And now they are not too fond of symbolic reasoning because they think it's less authentic.
Wow. Yeah, sure. I actually think I'd like to, I thought about doing a thread today just to spice it up even more about comparing what I perceive to be the similarities between those sort of itinerant preacher movements in the Americas and the Besht, Baal Shem Tov, and Hasidic movements, and that sort of we can connect with God without getting approval, like that sort of spiritual fervor out in the boonies, not from the centers of power, but like that rural orthodoxy kind of thing. I think is fascinating, and it's like it's a cyclical kind of thing that people will sometimes do, often in reaction to cultural crises. And I think America and Eastern Europe were going. Those were very different cultural crises, but sometimes there's a pressure that's applied, and then the rural communities get radically spiritual in different ways, and it's messy, right? And sometimes it's unorthodox, but it's I don't know. What do you think about that?
I would be a little wary about taking the American image of the Baal Shem Tov and applying that to the historical Baal Shem Tov,
Mm,
who was very much within the sincerity mainstream of Judaism. Um,
okay,
Hasidic
sure.
spirituality has been aggressively reinvented in American media several times.
Okay.
Um,
Hmm.
you're not totally wrong, um,
Yeah,
but it was
I could be shadow boxing with a phantom, a media
well.
dimension.
It no, I mean, how many people are aware of the ins and outs of 17th century Hasidic Mitnagdic debate? Um, Even amongst Hasidim and Mitnagdim, not that they call themselves that, but um,
Yeah.
the like the Baal Shem Tov, I think he certainly emphasized intent more than mainstream orthodoxy, but he did not like mainstream
Authenticity.
orthodoxy is never. Well, no, because it wasn't an authenticity would be your authentic self. His whole shtick was creating that intent
Mm,
or
okay.
unconceived. Yeah, um, it was not a concern about the authenticity with which you did rituals. It was a concern about the proper attitude and nature of doing rituals. So this is an internecine dispute within sincerity.
Internecine. Okay. Yeah.
Internal.
I call it internecine, but maybe
Oh,
that's too Christian.
I I learned
Fine.
that word from reading. You would have
Okay. Yeah.
you could have the right pronunciation there.
I actually learned
Um,
recently. I thought internecine came from. I thought that meant people who all uh, were inside of the Nicene Creed. AKA, they're all Orthodox. Like functionally, I got to the same place, but by uh, gross misuse of etymological roots. It has nothing to do with the Council of Nicaea whatsoever. It just sounds like it does to me.
no, yeah, but like there were a number of debates between the Litvaks and the Hasidim, um,
Hmm.
many of which were important, but I'm not sure I'd want to parlay issues of authenticity.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay,
because
fair enough.
one of the
I'm just
main
trying to build
concerns.
bridges here.
Oh,
I'm just
yeah, and I understand what you're doing, but like, if you go and you read the Nefesh HaChaim of Rab Chaim of Volozhin, which is an anti-Hasidic work, he's taking issue with the notion that this is a completely inauthentic intentionality.
oh wow. Okay. Okay.
Um,
So there are wheels within wheels.
yeah,
We'll grant that.
yeah.
Hmm.
I do think it would be interesting maybe to cut back to
Yeah.
aesthetics and use that to switch into so I mentioned critical theory at the start of this dispute.
Hmm.
It tends to get associated with Marxism in American news, uh, except and it's one of the I mean, Cam on the like conservative platforms on progressive platforms pretend it doesn't exist, and then you go to university academies and your professors are like, "Don't tell them we're teaching critical theory. We're unconcealing hidden net matrices of oppression." Um, it's like you can just be honest about what you're doing.
Hmm.
If you're not, nobody doesn't. It's like, but then they know what we're doing, and they'll come out. Any, it's academics have really weird military strategies. Um,
Yeah.
are almost a fourth position here, rooted in rooted in lying
Yeah.
or
I wouldn't know what
disassembly.
dog whistles was if it wasn't for um, neo-Marxists giving away that they're all about them by by it unveiling that term to the world and then accusing everyone else of using them.
Yeah, it's a weird, and this is I say from personal experience, also from what I like. I read a lot of scholarship from like left-wing sources, and it's not the positions that bother me, it's the lack of like honesty, which is maybe a prolificity issue, or sincerity, like authenticity issue. It's if you're going to defend a position, I think you should be honest about the commitments of your position. It's otherwise it's basically complete disrespect to other people. And I don't see how you can, if you're not respecting people, you can't treat them equally.
Right.
Right.
But if words have no inherent meaning, it's just a tool in power dynamics. The only I was just listening to something about Machiavelli today, and to tie Marxism with Machiavellianism, the only responsible leader is someone who does lie, because they're the only person who is willing to do what it takes to get that job done.
You're the only truly authentic person, in Moeller's words.
Yeah, and I shudder to think of the image in which that they are conjuring with someone, with a consummate liar, using power like that. But history tells us of many such types.
Well, I mean, it's in the case of academia, they're basically destroying everything they hold dear. Because if you want to live in an equal society, it has to be a society rooted in respect and honesty. Right. You're just not treating like you want to play, and you want to talk about like an anti-colonial or a post-colonial society. That's even more true. Right. We're talking about avoiding the white preconceptions, to use an academic, like an intersectionality language. But then we're not going to acknowledge our own like worldview in discussion with somebody else. And I'm going to apply like power discourse to the other person to break apart their worldview, while doggedly refusing to acknowledge that I even have a worldview. It's like mental colonialism. And it's just going to undermine the projects they claim to care about, which you and I have I've mentioned. I think actually, was it at the start of the stream? I think it may have been before the stream. So yeah, like people, they seize on an idea that they think is necessary for their values, and then that idea ends up like destroying their values. And if they were more self-reflexive, they'd be able to save what they hold dear.
It all gets back to one has to be willing to hold to one's principles, even if one loses politically or culturally. If you don't have that, and I feel like authenticity and sincerity culture both get at that idea. There's room for that, I think.
It's that you can't even win. It's not that it would be a hollow
lose, wouldn't you?
If you abandon your principle, then the principle just won't be there, and then you just can't have a society where it exists.
What do you have? You protected the people by becoming becoming the people's monster, I guess. I don't know.
It's almost a Shakespearean tragedy. But actually, it does touch on one of the central issues of prolificity and the end of the ordinary, right? Which is this notion that lying is authentic behavior because I want to.
That's good.
And this is one of the weird paradoxes of that sort of authenticity. And Moeller, the people you mentioned you got this idea from have been taking a critical look at prolificity. So does Byung-Chul Han does not call it prolificity, but he, in analyzing the work of academics like Wilhelm Flusser, He is very critical of the same. A media theorist from the 70s who was responsible for architecting a lot of our modern social media ideas. And he wanted this because he thought it would create a truly equal society because people would have to care about others first and foremost. This to him was the ethic of Jesus. Literal, like he quotes Jesus explicitly.
Sure.
And Han, very critical of this annihilation almost of. We won't talk about like self and other, and its replacement with the Hall of Mirrors. But Moeller himself is pretty positive about this. And that's because his view and then this isn't the one in his social media work, but he angrily accuses Confucians of hypocrisy for saying we should be honest and benevolent and courteous, because actually the authentic thing to do is to be an amoral jackass. Which is the raw rebel spirit. You see this today consistently in a broad spread of the American populace that sees freedom and order as opposites.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because that is, I mean, traditionally we ascribe that to Gen X. It's the seed of that. We like to say, I don't know if any of this is true, but this is just how these concepts are being played out right now at the edges of our prolific culture. But boomer culture provided the seed, and it grew to full flower with Gen X and with millennials, and of every political hue and persuasion, for absolutely, and particularly in America, it finds its. There's a lot of manure in which to grow that particular horticultural experiment in America.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's that generational or even new. Like there have been Chinese thinkers who were defending severe forms of authenticity culture, such as Li Ji in the 15th, 16th century.
Oh, neat.
And prolificity is really it's not so much a part of the reason I worry. Like I said, I use these things maybe as a heuristic, but not as a hermeneutic. Is I think prolificity is story. It's always existed. It's just that historically it was seen as a character flaw. Not as a way of being. And I think the shift has been from seeing it as a way of seeing it as a character. Like I mentioned, vanity. One of the distinctive features in most, I won't say all, but most, I guess, pre-modern societies was that part of growing up is you stop caring about what others think, unless there's some compelling moral reason, right? But even then, it's less that others think that, and more that, like you're talking about honor shame at the start. In the thought of the scholar Junji, we're just inherently dishonored when we behave dishonorably.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what society thinks, or like if everyone in society worships depravity, pure theoretical, this isn't a piece of cultural criticism. Like if everyone in society worships depravity, and nobody cares for wisdom or benevolence or courtesy, the Confucian sage does not change his behavior. He stays the course.
So that would be that's awesome. I love to hear those gradations, and I think that's what people try to get at. I'm not saying this is what that is, because I can respect that you're just adding color dimensionality to the rich traditions that of Chinese philosophical thought. But that's what people try to get at with innocence guilt culture. Uh, Again, that's like a very simple bucket container philosophical container that we're putting lots of cultures into. And not all Western cultures are even classically defined as innocent uh, guilt cultures, but that kind of idea that, like, if I'm not guilty, my guilt doesn't have anything to do with uh, where larger society is going or not. If I'm either personally guilty or I'm personally innocent, and I'm going to live in light of that kind of thing, which patterns well with authenticity culture, I think. But like you're saying, that's not an East versus West thing. You have to be like low resolution to even, like, you're not even patterning any of these particular philosophers in order to say that's an East versus West thing. But
yeah. I mean, and to be clear, I Junji is not saying you should not care what other people think, because he's
Sure.
still a Confucian role ethicist.
And obviously, innocence guilt does have some kind. I mean, those are just terms. Those are legal terms.
Yeah.
So there's some kind of category of being aware of what other people think and caring. I think you can't determine your own innocence or guilt, not cosmically. So
yeah, there's also questions of like what even is a norm.
Yeah, sure.
Morality is not a like every society. I think this is one of those ideas that shows up, and this is one of those, like, people take the thing that's true, and then you ever see the notion that, like, before Christianity, people had no notion of sin? Have you seen that polemic?
No.
You have clearly not gotten to experience the fun and joy that is neo-pagan theology.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think I've seen, like, the idea of religio, of public, like, worship being in right order with the gods, and that's an honor shame thing. That's a sincerity thing, and then sin being some kind of authenticity term, innocence guilt term that puts you personally, regardless of how you're sincerely performing your cultic function. I'm trying to steel band it, but I feel like that I have seen that, and is that kind of the idea?
So
Like, nobody cared about guilt until Christians showed up.
Well, one of the ideas in the Nietzschean stream is that the pagans did not have a notion of morality until Christianity came along and invented it, so it could bully people by teaching them that they'd sinned. Whereas before, such behavior would not be seen as sin. And where this idea is going wrong is, it's not that pagans didn't have a notion of morality, it's that the phenomenology of morality was enfolded into a much broader sphere of value-based reasoning. It wasn't that Christianity added something. Christianity just created a theoretical distinction between moral-based reasoning and, like, aesthetic or spatial. Like the value of space. And that tends to, like, one of those weird errors that people fall into. But the question is, like, we tend to read morality into Confucianism, but how much of this is actually a moral issue for Confucians versus how much of this is decisions of Western translators? Because I happen to know that the word for principle or law is often rendered as moral into English. And a lot of Chinese discussions may be less concerned. Not to say that they're not concerned with issues that would fall under morality in English, but that's not how they're conceptualizing it. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. Once again, we just have too low resolution of a view. Yeah. But I hate to dissemble. Like, is there anything we can build out from this? Like, it's important to do the good work of adding. I mean, I keep saying like adding, higher resolution frameworks, and I think we're both good at that. But like, so what do we say? Because we are trying. I mean, I think we could acknowledge that these efforts at framing the cultural shift in Western Anglosphere cultures, and particularly online, people of our generations, that we're trying to do, that we're trying to describe something that's going on. Something probably is going on. Can we use any of this? All these like upresed tool sets that we've kind of formulated and identified. Can we use any of them to get at what's going on?
Yeah. So there has been a massive collapse in notions of the self and other in the West. And people sometimes often frame it as a moral issue. I think it's mostly a spatial issue that then massively plays into morality. But this came from several areas. Social media played a huge accelerating role, but part of what it was doing was manifesting goals that had been part of, like, a lot of computer programming types do read philosophy. The American politicians and news media may not, but like Silicon Valley does. And they have been extensively engaged with a stream of European philosophy, which like almost post-identity. It aims at the deconstruction of what it means to be human and to have selves. I mentioned like Wilhelm Flusser, like famous media theorist, Dorian Sagan, also working in this tradition, Giorgio Agamben, a few others who I'm not as familiar with their writing, so I don't want to bring them up just in case. And like in the 60s and 70s, you had all the hippies going around. That was extreme authenticity culture, right? They didn't found it, but it was an extreme form of it, with the live, love, laugh, be yourself stuff. Alan Watts is the poster child for this sort of thing. And at the same time, you had coming out of Europe the almost complete opposite. There is no I. There is no authentic self. There is merely a valueless holism.
Okay.
This is most famously propounded in the book Dialectic of Enlightenment by Horkheimer and Adorno. But it was certainly like implicit in a large number of other works, implicit or explicit in a large number of other works, many of which had very different. I'm trying to avoid giving these things political labels because there were a wide variety of political movements underlying this. And this, like when Moeller invented the term prolificity, so to give this sort of high res here that we can get function, he was talking about a culture lived in reaction to others' self-perception. And he thinks this is a good thing because it's a sort of, again, departure from the enemy of the European I shouldn't say European too strongly here, because obviously lots of other people in Europe doing lots of other different things, but the critical theorist of Europe and his skepticism towards the authentic self.
Yeah.
And that skepticism is well-founded, for the record.
Sure. Yeah, I find I heard Jordan Peterson has recently been talking about his he feels that he's partially responsible. He feels guilty for what he's done in the psychiatry or not psychiatry, the psychology industry, for perpetuating this idea that your mental health comes from inside you. It's something inside of you that you have to internally work through and work out and pass through to get healthy. He now believes that mental health is it's a societal thing as much as personal, and that it's your health is the result of your relationships with real other people that are in your family, social network kind of thing, that you've got to resolve with those people. You can't just talk with yourself to get out of those mental health issues, which I think is fascinating. That sounds like that turn towards, at this point, well, I think we've really well demonstrated that the other tool sets, the prolificity, authenticity stuff, is just, those are too blunt of instruments to get at this sort of thing. But I feel like that's kind of getting at something that Byung-Chul Han would appreciate and respect.
Yeah.
Is that if your mental health isn't inside you, if your mental health is a social phenomenon, at least that there's a necessary dynamic that's social and fundamentally social, then that's a radical shift away from, I think, at least, let's just say, modern understandings of what the self is. And I'm here for it. Absolutely. I'm eating popcorn. I think it's fascinating.
Well, yeah, and I will say I agree with Peterson that modern mental illness rates are way too high to be an issue of better diagnostic tools, which is what I keep seeing people say. They're like, that we just have better diagnostic tools. It's like, according to our statistics, anywhere from a third to half. And those are just the people with diagnoses. There is no evidence that most people, the people in the Middle Ages, knew what depression was. There is no evidence that a quarter of them had it. Not to say that the Middle Ages was a paradise, but or was better than our period. But I do think it is a salient fact that our modern mental health issues are way too high to be an issue of diagnosis. And I also think the idea that all of our mental health issues are just because psychologists diagnose like mad is also false.
Yeah.
Which,
that could be not to lean on this too much, but that could be a vestigial reflex of that authenticity culture rearing its head, where we feel like we have to we're doing a more successful job of all fields of fact finding if we find them to be more if we're aiding in the global project of diversifying, I guess, it's all the diagnoses, if everyone gets a diagnosis, then we've achieved, that's the end state. That's the end goal. Everyone gets a diagnosis, and ultimately everyone gets a unique one, I feel like, is the point of authenticity psychology.
Yeah, it's a battle, I guess, between the sort of the authenticity slash Whig history, March of Progress style.
Love that.
And on the one hand, and then on the more skeptical side, you have, ironically enough, Foucault, who's been extensively he's selectively used by academics and drives a lot, but I think, funnily enough, I think he's now become a figure of the right. Where, especially because of
Really?
COVID. Well, his whole idea was biopower, right? That the state controls diagnoses, both medicinal and criminal, as a way of controlling individuals through, like, the state uses death to value life. That is not an exact quote, but I think that's a paraphrase of one of his books.
Oh, fascinating.
And that idea has really found a home on the right, mostly in response to COVID, right?
Yeah,
And
sure.
a lot of the psychology stuff involving, I don't want to go too into it, but like LGBT politics. And I'm seeing a lot of right-wingers accepting Foucault wholesale in terms of the medical industry, whereas he's definitely there on the, again, proverbial left. I don't really think these are super valuable distinctions, but more selectively used. Though I did see, I never checked up on her. I kept meaning to check up on her after COVID. Famous proponent of Foucauldian vaccine skepticism before COVID, and I keep forgetting to check up on her and see if she's kept those arguments going, or if she bowed to her co-politicals.
Who was that? Was she?
I don't want to say because I know her.
Oh, personally, you know her?
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
Sorry.
We won't dox her then. Yeah.
Well, or me.
Yeah.
But what was I about to say? Yeah. So the criticism of authenticity culture was I guess, like, involved in, like, Christian scholarship, very obvious, like no man is an island. Human psychology is a morass of often differing sentiments that don't all come from one pure self. In an immanent sense, there could be, and I would say probably is, a deeper, higher self, but that is not the self I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And then you had the turn away into the other, or you had the turn into the prolificity. And Han, his main thesis is that we've abandoned the other, and that this sort of trendiness is an attempt to impinge ourself upon reality. And that, I think, is the issue with a lot of like neo-aesthetic approaches amongst trads. It's not really an objective concern with some sort of transcendental beauty. It's aesthetic posturing. Not that they're the only ones guilty of this, but it's a social media phenomenon where our aesthetics are a posture rather than a engagement. Which is precisely how it threatens the ordinary, because you might have people with different aesthetics in a commons, but they'd still be, their aesthetics would be genuine or representative. Maybe to pick a weaker term.
Well, posturing's only a bad move if you're not looking at it from the perspective of a prolific culture, I suppose.
Well, yeah, from within prolificity, there's nothing wrong with the posture, right? In fact, there are political theorists who defend systemic, like, performativity as the way of the future. But this is precisely what hardline constructivism is, in a sense. But
Mhm.
for most of us, and this is, I guess, showed up on the channel before, most of us want a commons, right? We don't want to be like, it's only fun being some outcast if there's a society to be a loner from. If everyone's just a loner sitting in the corner of the bar, our eight-dimensional bar, drinking, um, then and there nobody's like chilling in the bar, then the bar ceases to exist as a real space.
Wow. Wow. Yes. Yes. Yes, and amen.
Yeah.
Gosh, well said.
Yeah, there needs to be we can have a, like, I'm not saying we should just uncritically accept a commons. In fact, I think we should be wary of like naive attempts to revive the commons, right? Because I don't think people really know. I think people know that you cannot constantly be in revolt. Not to say that there's not a time and a place for revolt, but yeah, there needs to be something to revolt. In Chesterton's words, we turn a revolution, so we do a revolution to get back home again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people want to be orthodox. And honestly, that was where a lot of social protest movements have gone wrong the last few decades. They keep mistaking, like, they keep celebrating weirdness and outsiderness when the problem is the people who are weird and outside don't want to be weird and outside. um,
Mm-hmm.
but so I know you mentioned Han, and we haven't really gotten into a full explanation, but I almost think we can go past him at this point, because I think there is something to be said for concern for others, right, and for a fundamental concern with the external world. I also think we should be wary, however, of the vision of, like, the abrogation of the self, in doing so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there should be a place, maybe not an authenticity place, but a place for the real self, within the commons.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think of how. Man, I wish you were talking for like 10 more seconds, and I would have formulated my.
Yeah, I mean, okay. I don't know, keep going. In Martin Buber's, to critique Martin Buber, this would be the I-we relationship that he strenuously rejects, because he's a bitter rationalist and doesn't want to accept that you can have a relationship to something and not have a relationship to that thing at the same time. Which,
Yeah.
like, you can relate to something on the basis of your shared presence in the thing, without necessarily relating to the person itself.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah. What was slowly starting to congeal in my slow brain was this idea of I don't know what my problem is, but I tend to try and do the Hegelian thing where I try to see what we can. It's like we define these boundaries of the zone of the topic, and the different folks aligning themselves as antitheses to each other, and then I try to see if there's a synthetic resolution that kind of takes the best of both. And maybe we say that it could be in some conversations we find that they're both right from certain points of view, or sometimes that synthesis looks like cherry picking, frankly, or maybe we just take the best of both and see if there's a we can kind of project into the future some of these concepts in a way that we say that besides adding to the puzzle pieces,
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to the Confucian answer here, which was to understand sincerity as a transformation.
Yeah. Okay.
But and then I think like Moeller, it just cavalierly insults the entire Confucian tradition and spits on it. I really, he was not a good scholar. Not a good scholar. At all. I've been trying to keep censoriousness out, but I was really unimpressed with his academic virtue.
No kidding. Yeah.
The way he treats his sources and other people. I'm like, oh man, this is precisely where Confucianism would be most valuable. Confucianism was aware that people's sincere desires at any given moment or authentic are probably not to be courteous to others. We're talking about a religion centered around the family, which is the epicenter of friction in society, right? It's the one of the only social bonds you never choose, right? You choose who you marry. You choose what clubs you join. You choose where you work. Even in medieval China, maybe if you were a farmer, you wouldn't you just go farm, but still, you choose who you associate. You choose who your friends are. You do not choose your parents and children. They just exist. You are born into this world to, if you are very fortunate, 2 parents. You live with those parents. If they do their job, they raise you. And then it's not like when you have maybe transhumanism will one day bring us to the point where you can pick your baby's hair color and personality traits, which I think would be an immense loss for morality. But you just have a baby, right? That's just it, basically. You do your best, and then you just get whoever you get. And maybe the person you get or your parents are going to have huge personality conflicts with you, right? This is the issue, the fight between personality and character. How do we make moral traditions that allow for shy people to just be shy, or introverts, versus everyone has to go out and party.
Sure.
And this, so your parents, maybe they're very sporty and you're very bookish. Maybe they really like TV and you don't. And these things cause friction. And this was the moral issue that Confucianism made the very root of, in the words of the Xiao Jing, the classic of filial piety, the very, very not first sentence, but second sentence. Confucius said, filial piety is the root of all virtue, and the stem out of which grows all teaching.
Take that, Marxists.
See, as I said, why I think any attempt to compatibilize Confucianism with our post-social philosophies is just doomed. But at the same time, it's not like Confucianism was hopelessly naive about Rockwell, the Rockwell image of the happy family. Not that Rockwell thought all families were like that, but what he shows in his paintings, right? The sort of very 50s style, white. They were perfectly aware that people's social differences that show up inevitably in a family cause a great deal of friction. And navigating that friction or transcending it like, you don't just stuff your emotions down and do your duty. I mean, if you absolutely have to, that's the last resort, right? But that's after everything else has already failed. And so the answer that Confucianism came to, and as did Taoism and Buddhism, so good company here, was that your original self and the self you are now are not one and the same thing.
Yeah.
And you need to undergo you need to undergo a fundamental transformation to be free, to go return to your original self.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
This has been the answer of Chinese philosophers, and I'm picking on the Chinese thinkers here because I think they were concerned with I think they're the same answer as in Judaism and to a lesser but still real extent in Christianity, right? We have Maximus the Confessor's two wills. The notion, like, now we see through a glass darkly, soon we shall see clearly. I know that's not the exact wording of Paul, but I think that's pretty close, eh?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It's this notion that in the life of trust, which is actually another way of translating Cheng, sincerity, trust, faith. We translate it sincerity, but there's 5 or 6 other meanings in Chinese that have a range of meanings in English, like trust. Faith is the root of all virtue.
Mm-hmm.
That it actually can in fact transform you can transform yourself. And this was their answer. This is the only answer I have found that worked after analyzing dozens of different positions on this exact issue.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a synthesis.
Yeah.
You say? Yeah.
Yeah, combines elements of all 3 positions.
Mm-hmm.
And this was especially important for Junji because he held to a very Calvinistic view of human nature.
Yeah. Yeah, that's enough, man. You know what I'd love to do is bring in someone else to spice it up. I don't know who. Could be Griswold Grimm, but somebody who could push into this idea, because I just don't think I don't think I'd be very fair with it. But this notion that the Calvinist and traditional Chinese, like doomer fatalism view that's been prescribed, that's been like plastered on Calvinism and, like, I guess traditional Protestant, like early origins Protestantism.
Yeah, Junji isn't a doomer fatalist though. That was my point about so Junji famously argues against Mencius that human nature is intrinsically evil.
Yeah.
What's less well known is that he thought that we could transform ourselves and become good. And so him and Mencius, and this is one of the really interesting things actually, is if you look at disputes about human nature, is if you're looking at the shallow stuff, actually human beings are amazing and it's just late stage capitalism that causes them to be douchebags to other people. That I see everywhere in spite of the fact that it makes absolutely no sense. But if you're looking at more sensible formulations, you will notice that people have an amazing tendency to end up at the exact same position, no matter how much they strenuously note that they're defending a totally different position.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mencius says human nature is inherently good, Junji says human nature is inherently evil, and then both spend 300 pages elaborating the concept of this position and end up reaching the exact same conclusion as to what we have to do to become good people. And part of that is because they're both Confucians, but another part is because they're both wrangling with the objections to their position. And as they wrangle with the objections, they have to make their position better and better, right? Refine it. Like Mencius cannot remain in denial about man's amazing proclivity to do evil. So he needs to provide a meaningful explanation for this, which he does by talking about the way that he has several different ways, but one of them is the way that false ideas can corrupt and eventually wither our original. He talks about germ sprouts, the four germs of Mencius, which is just the four virtues in potentia in the human being. And Junji, on the other hand, doesn't want to adopt like Calvinism. I've only ever seen the doomer fatalism endorsed by Dostoevsky, who was not a Calvinist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Dostoevsky is the one who says that Hume famously denied, like to the point that even his conservative contemporaries thought he was adopting a potentially absurd position. Said, we don't really need to do like societal reform because human nature sucks, so it won't work.
Love that.
That's yeah, like if you're looking at, this was a major critique of him, not just from socialist writers, but also from his fellow conservatives who thought that he was committing Tsarism to a doomer, like just a bizarre position that would leave it completely incapable of wrangling with any of the problems facing it, which sure enough was precisely what, not that Dostoevsky then influenced government policy, but like they couldn't adapt, the government collapsed communism to aggressively shuffle 100 years of complex social processes into 4 sentences. But yeah, like I've only ever seen that position advocated by Dostoevsky, and in his case, it's a really weird and by exceedingly unfair characterization of Jews, Catholics, and Protestants that leads him to adopt that position.
Yeah. That, that's another topic I'd like to explore with you, and maybe with another guest as well, of the because you and I, one of the things that we hopefully this stream, I'm sure this stream, if it does nothing else, it demonstrates that you and I have a shared interest in I don't know, just clarifying and defining, and we're not necessarily we're happy to judge, but that could happen at a later step, really, like sometimes there's just immense value that's overlooked with a hasty judgment, when really we could spend just an open amount of time exploring and helping to understand how these kind of terms evolve, and it's not necessarily wrong that a term finds new definition over time. And all that to say, this idea of Eastern Orthodoxy, particularly you and I are speaking English, in this Anglosphere online world of what does Russian Orthodoxy mean? What does it stand for? What does it stand against? And and then those in the West, like, who are the Eastern Orthodox thinkers, the poets, the authors, the philosophers who have been translated widely and celebrated widely in the West, in the Anglosphere, that are readily available to read and to learn from, like Dostoevsky. Like in some, I'm aware that Tolstoy is unorthodox in some respects, but I mean, he's coming from a Russian. He identified as coming from a Russian Orthodox framework, at least, even if he was having trouble with the authorities.
Yeah, I think he was more orthodox than some might think.
Yeah, well,
at least in his military issues, ethics.
Well, sure. I mean, both of those, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, all that to say, would be two people that I think really, I'd be curious if people are really tracking with those two guys, because I think until 5 minutes ago, those were the two people who were, writing creatively about culture from an Eastern Orthodox from a Russian Orthodox perspective, that we could read and learn from, like as historic, credible eyewitness sources for how to think from that perspective. And all that to say, I'm not sure if they are relevant at all. I think in as much as I love them. And so this isn't me making judgment calls, but I just don't know if they have any cash currency in the Eastern Orthodox imagination today, like whatsoever.
Yeah, well, certainly not Tolstoy.
Yeah.
Dostoevsky would be more complex. I think most Eastern Orthodox would probably resist his social positions, which were, to be fair, very extreme by his own time. Certainly I don't know how broad the Solovyov branch is. Solovyov and Dostoy engaged in an extensive critique of Dostoevsky's ethics, centering around the notion of, I mean, A, the Jew, but B, the notion of like reform, which in Dostoevsky's mind are associated, right? He thought the Jew was the paradigmatic socialist. And also the Jew was the Catholic was the paradigmatic Jew. I'm not a big fan of Dostoevsky's Demons, the book. That's the name of the book. Because it's, I think, a very much of it reads like a highly literate form of Baptist fundamentalism, if I might be a little judgmental here. And I think my interactions with Eastern Orthodox would lead me to think they want to resist his view of reality. I can't blame him. Like, I think that's perfectly fine. I don't know how broad spread Solovyov is. And there's a few other names I see thrown around constantly. Losky, Florovsky. There's also a bunch of other thinkers that, ironically enough, like I read, and no Eastern Orthodox I've ever met has read, like Berdyaev, the Nietzschean Christian. It's like, and I bring them up, and people look at me, and they're like, "The who now? What?"
Oh yeah, I mean, I was just reading today about the success, Roman Catholicism's embrace of fascism in the 1930s. So I'm with you. It was the only way to save the West from democracy and Jewry and Freemasonry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know what you were reading. I tend to think that thesis is overblown.
Really? Yeah.
Oh, there certainly were branches, but I also, like, the Pope kept putting out encyclicals condemning it. So.
Which Pope? Yeah. Well,
I,
Yeah.
I tend to talk about the Pope the way I talk about the pharaohs. Just reincarnations of
Just
Horus.
Pharaoh. Just yeah. The
No,
eternal
the
Pharaoh.
Pope in the 30s was not a big fan of the Nazis.
Hmm.
I think he can arguably be accused of having systematically underrepresented the threat that fascism posed to Europe and to European civilization. I don't think he can be accused of having supported it. Or he'd be accused, yeah.
I wasn't thinking of the Nazis. I was thinking of
Oh yeah, fascists or Nazis, yeah.
Yeah.
Though yeah, there is some degree of adjacence, certainly between Catholic corporatism and fascist corporatism.
Yeah. I mean, well, corporatism. Oh, interesting.
Not in the sense of the modern corporation. In the sense of the body politic as a series of organs.
Yeah. Oh, fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, at least the Italian fascists started to. They were really the framing that I was led to believe was that they were saying, really, we're doing what you Catholics said should be done, but we're actually successful in doing it. And many Roman Catholics said, you have a point there.
Which is what Nazi Germany did with its its own Lutherans, and you see it today with some of the more some of the progressive Christians, right? Jesus said to love the oppressed. That means my political ideology.
Love that. Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. We're actually doing what you guys said hypocritically suggested people should do and didn't live up to. We're actually doing. Yep.
Yeah, it's perennial, and it's not a Christian thing to be. In case anyone's listening, like this is people react. I've been like people have a really people are subconscious until a problem arises, and then they begin to think as a reaction. In the words of Charles Sanders Peirce, adapting Plato, but I think he's pretty accurate. And the obvious problem, in one sense, this is good because it means you can train yourself to think by aggressively encountering more and more problems, like working out. In another sense, our tendency to think as reaction means we have a tendency to just engage with whatever is in front of us and take it and run with it, rather than critically evaluating the concepts themselves. And you'll see this all the time with people will accept ideas that have no basis in their philosophy, and then they'll try to like compatibilize it, or they'll reject it, but they'll pick the proffered alternative of whatever they're reacting to, and they don't really have to because whatever they're reacting to is just way too different for them to be for there to be a choice there. Like if we're looking at the dispute between private property and communist theories from, say, an Old Testament lens, the Old Testament does not have the notion of property from either tradition. Right? Its notion of property is something totally distinct. And the risk is if you react and don't think proactively, you can just end up either going with the flow or adopting the false alternative instead of putting forward your view. I was going to say I've spoken to you about it before, but I think it's on the video that's not up on your channel yet, where I was talking about like the faith versus reason debate.
I think it's on my channel now, just with sketchy audio. So
Oh, you have been uploading those?
yeah, I threw them up. I was just so ashamed because of my my sincerity culture origins that I didn't share the link with you yet. But they have really nice thumbnails. I'm very proud of those thumbnails.
Yeah, because people have been asking me about them.
Oh yeah,
So,
I'll send them your way.
Thank you. Yeah, don't worry about the audio quality. I'm recording this on a really crappy. I'm on a laptop. I wish I could record it on high-end audio equipment. If any of you, there's a nice donation link if you want to drop for.
Yeah,
the jokes.
Throw them our way.
Yeah, there's a donation link, but that was in the video description. But that was a joke. Don't worry about it. What was I about to say? Oh yeah, like faith versus reason. And my point, people just accept it, and you end up really weird, like mystery, like Eastern Orthodox Mysterianism, Protestant like irrationalism, and it's like no, the person you're supposed to be faithful to is the Logos. Not that I think rational but also like faith and reason are not, they're just words, and the word what they refer to differ across like the word faith in Judaism has very different meanings from what in Christianity, right?
Yeah, and you mean that? I'm assuming you mean today, because
today's Christianity. Yeah,
they're gonna evolve. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I think that actually, I think the early church is probably going to be much closer to today's Judaism on the issue of faith.
Yeah, I think that's probably a safe assessment. Yeah,
but yeah, like, and then you same with Hindu bhakti. I'm sorry, the Hebrew is bitachon, but bit spelled like bitachon. Then you have the Hebrew bhakti. You have. Well, I mentioned the word we translate as sincerity in a lot of Confucian works can be translated as trust. It doesn't make much sense, like reading why, and if you read it in English, if you translate it as like faith or trust, but you totally can. And if you ever read samurai treatises, a lot of them make no sense. Like, why are they talking about sincerity when they're talking about stabbing someone with a broadsword? The answer is they're talking about trust, which is in a martial context hugely important, right? It's just that in Chinese, the word, or Japanese, though the samurai were Confucian by training, and they're just using a word that just doesn't replicate well into English.
I'm a big advocate for using trust instead of faith, if for no other reason that it helps you rethink, to check your footing, and rethink your position and make sure you still have sure footing with your terminology, which is always a profitable thing to do, I think. And usually you'll find yourself in the same footing, I think. Sometimes not, but trust is an absolutely helpful term. And it doesn't sound like there's nothing about trust that sounds anti-reasonable, Actually, it sounds like it assumes there's some kind of reason thing going on.
Well, trust is inextricable, like reason is inextricably bound up with issues of trust.
Yeah, there you go.
This is one of the insights that I think has been profitable to come out of the postmodern sphere. Reason I'm not a big fan of just jettisoning every postmodern or critical theorist out the window, even if I disagree with them on all sorts of things, is they have hugely emphasized that modern political theorists and social theorists had a very ridiculous view of authority. They sort of, like Kant famously, like line 1 of his What is Enlightenment, like differentiates between trust, like the power of reason, versus, say, authority, which is where you just place yourself in other people and you don't mature because you're not thinking for yourself. And one of the helpful and productive conversations that has come out of the postmodern sphere is that reason is a form of authority. It's engaged with questions of authority. Like the weight I assign to evidence is partially of a matter of authority. And there isn't an actual hard distinction between, say, authorities like tradition and revelation and authorities such as reason and sense perception. Which isn't to say that I think they're all the same and are wildly indistinguishable, simply that they are not quite as... It's not like we have to... It's not like by accepting reason, we're just accepting the self in a way that we're not if we accept revelation.
Yeah.
Especially once you get past the stock image of your weird evangelical neighbor from Arkansas and start wrangling with what revelation actually means.
Yeah. No, yeah. It's really a phenomenon. It's a manifestation of that new term, that exclusive, that evangelical definition of faith, fideism, as we sometimes polemically use that term. The non-evangelical Protestants are like, that's just the expression. It's a cry for help from a cult, a community in retreat, trying to plug holes and stop the dam from bursting altogether. I think really is all what's going on there, which is sad.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and as I said, it's when you people react, and if they don't know how to react proactively or in an engaged way, you end up with issues like this.
Yeah.
That's what happened to the church during the world wars and today. And again, it's not even a Christian, like I mentioned earlier, the way a lot of Marxist theorists have diverged from why is it that after generations of Marxist theorists publishing books on why the media is the enemy of democracy, you're now just a decidedly super right-wing figure if you don't like the media. You're not Noam Chomsky. And to be, Chomsky is stuck to his guns on this, right? He's like, no, I wasn't trusting the media 40 years ago. I'm not trusting them now.
Yeah.
The media is not democratic. It's not it manufactures consent. And it's just because of reaction on the part of self-identified Marxists. Not again. It's just human. It's just a human issue. It's just a human issue.
Yeah. No. Great point. And and that's all this. Yeah. Contrary, hopefully it doesn't need to be said for anyone listening to the replay that we're not. We really aren't terribly interested in dunking on those bad people over there. That's really not very interesting to us.
No,
content for that.
Yeah, my goal is Socratic in building. I would much rather build stronger philosophies for my even for the people I see as my opponents.
Sure, absolutely.
It's objectively, I'm candidly, I'm neither a Christian nor a Marxist, but it's objectively a better thing if they have better, more human philosophies.
Yeah, for
them,
our enemies are not flesh and blood, but powers and principalities. Spiritual forces. Yes. Thank you for having me on. This has been a fantastic conversation. I think it's been a lively dialogue. And if I do say so, I think this is a great introduction to some folks who are going to want to get to know you better. And hopefully this could be something of an introduction that I can pass around to some folks and maybe get you some more guests if you'd be interested in chatting with them. I can think of a particular contemporary philosopher, professor, retired guy who I think would like to check you out. And I was hoping to gin this particular conversation up selfishly. That was my ulterior motive here, in order for this to be the sort of conversation that I think that you would be proud of and would want shared with said professor, so that he would come on and talk to you about modernity.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's welcome to. I'm happy to bring on anyone who is committed to like honesty and courtesy. That's really my standards. And yeah, like, I mean, I'm sure that you would not be recommending this guy, but for anyone listening to this, I am happy to bring on anyone who's going to discuss in good faith. This is, epistemology podcast mostly, but we handle every other topic, from, like, if you want to talk about like wonder in medieval Islam, or what it means to be free in Hinduism, like, by all means. I do not have my email. I have a business email. It's not in the link. I'll maybe add it or send, or you can get in touch through Matt or on Discord.
That works too. You guys know where to find me.
Yes. Yeah. Like, we can always set something up. I'm happy to platform you. I have to pay more attention to the YouTube terms of service, but I'm willing to get really weird. Or very normal. I was hoping, so Ryan Rose, who's been on this channel before, yes, that guy. Him and I wanted to do a talk show where we brought on people who are well known for maybe a certain issue, and then got their opinion on a totally different issue. Like, not just a different side of things, but a sphere that they never talk about. Like, bring on a new ager and get them to talk about their views on, like, classical music, as a way of unsettling forms of discourse and open. Maybe that's the wrong word. But getting people to sort of, the audience, that is, to examine things from different perspectives and maybe think about the world in a broader way.
Sure.
Yeah. A lot of scholars are known for one, or podcasters, right? And they go on and on and on and on. But you actually don't know, because that's their most popular thing. They have like 9 other things they specialize in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same with, like, it's like Hegel is best known for his theory of history. He is not as well known for his very complex theory of aesthetics, which is a shame, because his very complex theory of aesthetics has a great deal going for it that his theory of history does not. So,
yeah, no, very important. And in our prolific age, even if we don't want to identify with that philosophically, it's the water we're swimming in, and we could all be found liable of believing in the meme of a particular thinker rather than the thinker's own beliefs as written in his own works. Absolutely.
Yep. The much wider web of engagement, right? Like Plato's forms, Hegel's views on history, all sorts of examples here. I think that's about it, though. We've been going for over 2 hours now. Anything else you wanted to talk about? Or?
No, it's been a great couple hours. I'm very appreciative. Thank you again, Wild Philosopher. I got to get used to calling you that.
Yeah.
Hope to have more conversations with you, and importantly, hope to send this around and other streams of yours around, and get you some conversational partners to do the Socratic thing with. People would appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. So thank you very much. It has been a pleasure. For all of you listening, I hope you have a wonderful evening. Good night.